Have to actually unmute everything. Hello, friends. Slowly we'll get the room populated here. Welcome to Friday. It's been a strange couple months where I feel like this has not been as consistent of a stream. So I'm just very happy to be here, and even more thrilled to have our guest on today, Millie Gunn. Welcome, Millie.
Hi, thank you very much for having me. It's really exciting. Thank you.
It's really really exciting, and as i as I was explaining a little before we booted up here, I came to this article. I had sort of seen it, and I spoiler alert, have never played a Pokemon game, which is weird. And I get a lot of guff for it.
I've had that quite a lot from a few people, so it's okay.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, there. Even within canonic series, there are so many games I never played because just keeping up with the consoles, and so my brother and I were just not big Game Boy people. We had Tetris, and that was about it. So I think that's part of it, is just kind of not opting in at the very beginning. But even like Zelda, I've only played a handful of Zeldas and Marios. And some people have played all of them, and I'm like, how do you have time? Hi, Andrew. Welcome. Oh, and there's John Michael. So John Michael's actually the reason I ended up reading this one specifically, kind of bumping it to the top of the list. I was intrigued by Hawaiian musical tropes, but I didn't know Pokemon. But then John Michael's finishing a thesis imminently. Defends next week already, next Friday.
Good
Um,
luck.
Coming up on Pokemon. So I ended up reading it for that. Yeah. So
Good
it's
luck with the defense.
absolutely, we're all looking forward to it. And 8-Bit Aria's here. Hello, welcome, friends. Yeah, so I'd love to hear a little bit about Ludomusicology. How it came to be for you.
So, it's like a very long time ago. So I started my undergrad in game design at Brunel, which is like West London, which is where Andra Ivanescu works. So she was one of my lecturers. She was Ludomusicology, so that sort of she made me aware that it was a thing. So I did my undergrad in game design, just like so. My background is design rather than like music. And then I think it was our second or third year, we had a guest talk from Tim Summers, and he was talking about, I think it was a very long time ago. It was opera and video games. And at the time, I had like a sort of music scholarship with the uni, and I did like some opera stuff. And I was like, oh my God, two of my most like interests. This is a thing you can do. And so I was like, right, okay, that's what I want to do. I want to find a way to do that. And so I did my master's in experimental music, which was my first sort of like official music education. So coming into that at master's level was a bit of a like upwards learning curve at first.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and especially because it was experimental music, so it was like not much music knowledge, and then like John Cage, Stockhausen, like just straight in the deep end with as much of the weird and wonderful stuff as you can imagine. But because there was only four of us on that master's program, um, we kind of could do what we wanted. So the others, I remember they did a lot of like performance based stuff, and all of my stuff was like research on game music because I sort of was able to fairly easily justify that that was experimental because it kind of, I suppose, when you're looking at it through like a music theory lens, it is the interactive aspect can easily be like, yeah, this is experimental.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that did that, and then I finished that. Well, I was close to finishing that, and I was like, okay, I want to do a PhD. I sort of the masters was kind of a reason to like a stepping stone to get to be able to do a PhD and then fill in that sort of gap of knowledge in terms of the music side. And I'd love to actually do another one. I feel like that would be quite helpful because 1 year isn't really a huge amount of time. And then I had used for my master's thesis a lot of work from Isabella van Elfren, specifically the ALI or the Ali model. Um, and I really like horror and the gothic and stuff as well. So that was right up, like all her stuff was right up my street. And she was teaching at Kingston University, which is really near where I live and lived at the time. And I was like, oh, I don't really know how academia works. I'm just gonna email her and be like, do you want a PhD student? And she was like, yeah. So I had like a interview sort of thing, and yeah. So then I started that, and then 3 years ago, I did my first Ludo conference, which was this paper,
Mm-hmm.
and that was 2021, so that was online that year. And I've just sort of been doing them ever since. And yeah, there's been like like I've done other bits and like reviewed stuff for JSMG, and I've got a book review coming out at some point. I'm not sure when actually. I think in the next few months. On the Final Fantasy music of Nobuo Uematsu.
Oh yeah, we just spent our last month on that.
Yeah, so I've got that, read that, doing a review of that coming out soon. And yeah, so that's how that happened.
Oh, brilliant. I love that. And I love when everybody tells their stories because every single academic story is so different. And it shows in our work too because we really do have these unique voices that we're contributing from that sort of summation of our experiences. And it can also be a really scary place when you're starting if you
Oh
feel
yeah.
like you don't fit a certain mold. Or I remember even just having 2 performance degrees instead of getting a master's in musicology first, so I had never written a thesis, and then getting into school and thinking, oh no, what did I do?
Mm,
Am I smart enough for this? Am I going to be able to write anything that long? So
yeah.
dissertations are a strange beast.
Yeah, I'm like halfway through the write-up of my PhD. Well, I say that I'm handing in December, so I'm like halfway through the write-up year, so it's almost done. There's still a lot to write.
Yes.
I say that there's still a lot to
Yay.
write,
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
but yeah, I'm still like, how am I gonna finish this? Like, where are these words gonna come from? But then they start coming from places, so it's fine. But it's just, even I'm still like, that's a lot.
Oh yeah, I always tell people I had many moments of wondering if I would maybe just stop, just drop out, join a commune, do some organic farming or something. I don't know, become a wedding planner. That was actually one of my backup careers.
That
Um,
sounds fun.
I'm really detail oriented. I'm really good at that sort of thing. So I think I would have been excellent. I probably would have made a lot more money than I'm making.
Yeah, they make bank.
Yes, they absolutely can. So I guess maybe that's still in the mix. I don't know. Maybe I can still do that someday. But not a lot of there's a lot of precarity in the field. But everyone has such a different experience, and it's nice to have a reminder that okay, so I came in with all these certainly a classical training and like a performance background, and is that going to be a problem in any way? And just having people like my advisor say, well, no, because you can speak to kind of an embodied musicianship in a way that some of these other folks can't. So it's just a nice thing to remember that
Mm.
we're all bringing very unique things to the table. And so this one specifically, you mentioned experimental music and Stockhausen and horror and the ALI model. How do we get to Hawaii?
Honestly, very random. So the call for paper, it was for Ludo. So whenever I've done a conference, I've never gotten in with anything that's been related to my core research.
Oh
And
man.
I don't know why I think it's because maybe I'm trying to condense something into 300 words that I know really well because I've been writing it for 4 years and I'm just not getting it across. So every time I've had any success with abstracts or anything, it's been something completely left of field or brand new to me. And I think that's because maybe I explain it better in a shorter period of time because I'm almost explaining it to myself as I write it,
Sure.
which has the downside of then if it gets accepted, I've got 2 months to learn the topic in more detail, like like the nuances of it. But so the call for papers for that Ludo was um game music around the world or something. It was to do with like global perspectives and stuff on video game music. And I was like, I'd applied for Ludo like when I was like 20 or in my masters and didn't get in because I didn't know how to write an abstract to save my life. And this time I was like, right, okay, I can do this time. Let's think of something. And um can't remember why, but for some reason since I was like 15, 16, I really liked like traditional Hawaiian chanting music, like Malay music. I don't know where that came from. When I wrote this, my parents were like, lovely, but why? And I was like, oh no. So I'd always had like quite an interest in like Hawaiian music, and Pokemon Sun and Moon had been my favorite Pokemon game. I think because of the music, like I found the sound so, like it was so different from the previous installations. Like it really had a serious divergence from like the classic formula, or more so than anything else at the time. And I think I probably enjoyed it because I really had this fascination with Hawaiian sound and like Hawaiian instrumentation and stuff, and they do make some use of that. So I think that's kind of where it came from, and I was like, okay, this could be something. And so yeah, it was a Ludo paper first in 2021, and so that was kind of, yeah, a bit of a random thought process of where it came from. But that's kind of how all of my favorite stuff comes that way. It's just like, I need to think of something on the spot.
Yeah. Then did somebody at Ludo suggest, "Oh, hey, submit this to the Journal of Sound and Music and Games," or did you just decide, "Oh, I should turn this into something else"?
I think what happened was I think there was like an email that got sent out to the presenters like a week or two after, basically saying like, oh, this, just reminding everyone JSMG is a thing. We're always looking for submissions, et cetera, et cetera. And then I was sort of like, cool, like I'm going to take that as a let's do it. And so I emailed Tim, basically being like, I wanted to turn this into a thing. And then he really kindly like had a meeting with me and sort of talked me through the process for JSMG. And like, then I sort of spoke to my supervisor and I was like, sorry, I know this isn't my PhD, but can you help me with this? Which he's probably really sick of doing at this point. Like helping me with things that aren't actually my PhD. So yeah, so that's kind of how. And yeah, I just sort of started. I think I started writing it like a month after the conference. But what was really handy is because it was my first conference, I'd written a full script of
Right.
what to say. So when I got an email saying like, oh, we're welcoming submissions on the conference stuff, I was like, well, I have this written down, like just like more colloquially, obviously, like how you'd speak it. And I was like, I could spruce it up a bit, and then at least I've got like half a paper there, at least of what I want to say. Obviously, it wasn't right yet, but it sort of helped knowing I had already got like 3,000 words written down. That was sort of a bit easier, less of a barrier to overcome. Like, right, turn this slideshow into something. So that really helped.
I always have a script, like detailed script.
I've never done it since. For the past two, I've just winged it. That one.
This seems like a particularly like British thing that I've noticed. Like you and like Tim Summers like have this brilliant ability to speak off the cuff, and I'm too terrified. I can't do that.
I never think I can do it. It's like I get really nervous and I'll stand up and I'll be like, well, I have no choice now. Like I've dug my grave. I have to deal with this. I have to deal with the consequences.
So you're saying the way to do that is to procrastinate writing a talk that I have to do.
Yeah.
And because just until I can't physically write it in time.
Exactly. Okay. So by the time you get up there, you either wing it or you cry. So you've got to figure it out.
Oh, I mean, I do have a keynote coming up. Maybe that's maybe I'll wing my keynote. No, I'm kidding. I won't. I'm too absolutely not. I could do bullet point. Maybe I'll experiment with doing like more bullet pointy scripts and less like here's exactly what I'm gonna read.
I like flashcards. That's like the happy medium, I think.
That is a happy medium.
Sort of just feels a bit political though, like having some cards, and I don't know, that's probably not the vibe, but
yeah, I think part of it, Andrew writes, my scripts usually start at 15 pages before whittling down to about 6. And that's part of my fear is that I will sort of not be able to manage my time well if I'm speaking off the cuff. And so then I like to make sure that I kind of fit everything in, and then I practice it, and then I cut it more, and then make time for the musical examples. And
I always forget about those. That's that's like my downfall. I'm always like, I'll vaguely time it. I'll be like, that's fine. And then I'm like, you forgot about like the 3.5 minutes of clips that need to play. And
absolutely. Yeah. But it's a skill that I think some folks have really honed. And it can be really, really liberating if it's a newer project, or, it's kind of a sideline to your major work, something like this, where you can say, okay, this is still kind of developing. I'm just getting interested in this, but it's certainly not my main area of expertise. That could actually be pretty freeing. So I'm just always fascinated when I see somebody like a Tim Summers just get up and speak. Like, how do you do that? Can I take a class on that?
It's quite a stressful experience.
I imagine.
It feels good afterwards, because afterwards you're like, I did it. But before it's like,
It's like
not
playing a
great.
Dark Souls game and finally beating one like a boss that's taken 182 tries.
That's exactly what it's like.
Oh, I love that. So here's the full citation, everybody. It's in JSMG, which I don't know if Julianne's here today, but because Julianne is giving a keynote in Iowa, but Julianne has convinced me I have to either spell it out or say the whole journal because some people say JSMEG, and Julianne thinks that sounds gross.
I haven't heard that before.
I mean, we have NACVGM, which we say NACVGM, which is also
I say NACVGM.
Yeah, also just did not exactly mellifluous, right?
No.
Doesn't exactly roll off the tongue in a beautiful way, but JSMIG, SMIG, yeah, equals correct. There's been some tweeting about this, although we were talking before. I kind of wonder if Twitter becomes somewhat unusable as it may, how am I going to announce these? I guess I could actually use my Discord more, but are we all just going to go back to Facebook?
I hope not. I have it. I don't like it.
Right, like for some of us, we've had it for a long. Yeah, like email lists. Ew, please.
I quite like that actually.
There's that new blogging platform that I can't remember the name of, where it's like subscription based that everyone's using. Someone know what I'm talking about in the chat, please.
I have no idea.
It's no. Well, Mastodon is also that was being touted, but I think a lot of people just felt like, oh, that looks complicated. That was my exact response, which is why I haven't moved over yet. I could be convinced to eventually, but yeah, it looked like a lot. And it looked less more like Discord in that you kind of have to know the individual servers to be on in order to even find anybody. And so there was kind of a lack of interconnectivity that was a little scary to me. I'm like, the discovery is less on a platform like that. So we'll see. We'll see. But for now, I was still able to tweet today. And I guess we can't respond to each other or something. There's reply issues happening depending on what device you're on. Quote tweeting's
gone weird as well.
Yeah, quote tweeting's gotten weird. Everything is getting a little strange. It's very. I feel like this didn't happen. I grew up in MySpace era because I imagine.
Me too. I had that in Bebo.
So you had a MySpace. You know how that ran, but we didn't see this happen. We didn't. I don't think anybody held on to a MySpace long enough to like watch it die. So yeah, ranking your friends. Yes, your top 8 was a big deal.
I feel like things weren't really updated as much. Like they didn't require quite as much curation as now. It's like if you don't sort it out, it's going to crash and burn very quickly. Right. I mean, back then everything was a bit more self-sufficient. I would imagine. I'm saying as someone with no software development experience, that's a stab in the dark.
Yeah, I think we did Tom of MySpace dirty by just leaving him for Facebook, and look how that turned out for all of us. The clean version of "Stronger" by Kanye West was my MySpace page theme.
I think mine was a My Chemical Romance song.
I feel like I had a lot of. I was always changing the music, but my background was a close-up of an opal stone, so it was like very colorful, and I used a lot of lime green and black text because I was one of those punk rock types in high school. Anyway, so back from MySpace and Twitter and forecasting social media to the soundscape of Alola. I meant to look up a lot of these pronunciations.
I will have forgotten them by now,
in advance. So I may be somewhat incorrect, or my brain might default to almost like a Japanese style of pronouncing syllables. So apologies that this is certainly not an area that I have studied, and I would like to. I was actually saying at one point, we did a stream on Assassin's Creed with Dr. Cook and Dr. Grasso and Dr. Thompson, if they're in the chat. I know Karen is. I see Karen. And one of the questions that got asked by the audience was like, where would you like to see an Assassin's Creed? And Karen said Hawaii. like
I wish that had come out. That
pre-colonial Hawaii, and I was like, that is the best dang answer I've ever heard. And
would be
I've been
fun.
thinking about it ever since.
That would give me a lot more source material for this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you have as we will get to, we have a section on video games other than Pokemon Sun and Moon that kind of rely on these tropes that have been established. So there have been a lot of Pokemon games. So for those of us that have never played one, is this a good one to start with, or is it best to kind of start at the beginning?
I wouldn't say start at the beginning because I feel like it's like when you mentioned that you never really got into Pokemon. I can see why. Like if you don't start from the beginning, it's kind of like hard to sort of get that level of like endearment for it and like nostalgia. I guess a lot of it's nostalgia, and the fact that it's everyone's childhood and things like that. I wouldn't start with this one. This one is I say quite different. It's the same formula with like a new skin on it. So if you want like the true Pokemon experience, I'd go for something like the remakes of the first ones will do. I know people are like, oh, but the first ones, but I'm a sucker for like higher fidelity graphics. So if there's like the same story retold in 3D, I'm there for it. But yeah, no, I wouldn't start with this one. This one was actually really unpopular. Like a lot of people really didn't like Sun and Moon, which I found strange because I thought it was. I don't know if I was like going through a particular phase at that point where this one stuck with me quite so much. But it's not the most popular. A lot of people like slate it.
Mm.
I'm not sure why. And maybe it's because it does do a slight divergence from the OG Pokemon formula, but not massively. I'd say it's got the same sort of idea. Oh, there we go. As it says there, the sort of like going out, defeating gym leaders, etc. But they just have different names and things. They've got like more Hawaiian names in this one.
Right.
But yeah,
Heart Gold, Soul Silver would be the best game to start. That's interesting. Yeah.
That's true. I was replaying that the other day. Actually, that one's really nice.
They're not cheap right now. You should see what my husband spends on collectible video games. Our archive is pretty massive, so he's got a good network to be able to find things. Seconding, okay. Good to know from the Pokemon fans.
You could always get an emulator for those ones as well. That's
true. We're always pretty big on playing on console, as much as possible. So, if something is released like initially in both a console and a Steam, then we can do it on Steam or whatever. Oh, see, well, I'm glad there's some agreement here. I will have to look into that. That might actually be an interesting one for the stream team to do on a Thursday, where like Dana plays her first Pokemon. It would probably be less, shall we say, traumatic than when I was trying to play Ocarina of Time for the first time, because I was reading Tim's book. Yeah, but I wasn't playing a remake of that. I was playing original graphics and everything, and I skipped the N64 era, so that. It was a lot of me cursing at things. I do need to finish it. It's true, and I haven't played individually much since we were doing that, so maybe we'll come back to it at some point. All right, so we've had 35 some game, at least in the time of writing.
Yeah, that's not just mainline though. There's like actually it might be because there's like Pokemon Mystery Dungeon and
Snap.
Coliseum, which is an old one on like the GameCube, and then there's so many now.
I know the Snap one with the photography.
Oh yeah. I forgot about that.
And then what was the one that was augmented reality that everyone was playing? Pokemon Go.
Oh, Pokemon Go, yeah.
Yeah. I know people that are still playing that. Like,
me too.
They've almost gone underground about it because they feel like embarrassed that they're still playing it, but they're still very into it.
Yeah, it's still got a fairly big community, which always surprises me. Yeah. I played it for like that summer it came out, and everyone was so happy.
Because that was a pandemic move too, wasn't that right around? I feel
it was before. I think it was like 2017 or 18.
I feel like I saw a lot of people get into it kind of during the pandemic, like, oh, I'm gonna go on a walk, and oh wow, it's earlier than that. Okay. Well, I remember seeing a resurgence as like people saying, oh, I need to get out of my house and like I'll go on a nature walk and do. Yeah, so I guess it has had some longevity. Oh, it was for the 20th anniversary. Okay, so it's like the theater rhythm of the Pokemon franchise, is what you're saying. It was kind of released for the big anniversary, being 16 because Pokemon Go somewhere. Oh yeah, sure. Anyway, we've had a lot of these generally, and I know this because my brother actually really liked the anime, the American version of the anime that played over here. So I remember kind of seeing that, but we didn't play the games. So that you're 10 to 13-year-old ish going out into the world. You gotta catch them all, battle the gym leaders.
All of that.
Yeah, so that much I'm able to pick up even as a non-player. I kind of know the basics of it.
You got it down then, that's kind of it.
But yeah, like names of most of the Pokemon, no.
There's so many now. I mean, I don't know. I consider myself a fairly like big Pokemon fan. There's like over 1,000 now, I think.
Yeah, my husband will never let me forget that I forgot the name of, I guess, Meowth as he was in the US that followed Team Rocket around. And I called him Mewtwo at one point, like, because that's also a cat type character, and he's never let me forget that. He's like, yeah, remember that time you thought it was Mewtwo? I'm like, shut up. Yeah, I knew the Pokemon fans were gonna tear emoticons. Yes. I've learned my lesson. I've never repeated that story in front of Doug Perry, Drum Ultima, who's a big Pokemon fan, a big Mewtwo fan actually too, specifically.
They've kind of got the same letters in them. They're almost anagrams.
Yeah,
I think that's fair.
Yeah, like I know Pikachu. I know Jigglypuff. Like I know a couple of them. But I don't know, like, if I, could name most Pokemon. I maybe have a handful, maybe 10.
That's fine.
Anyway, so the first 4 games are very Japan-centric, based on Kanto, Kansai, Kyushu, and Hokkaido. Only they're called Kanto, Johto, Hoenn, and Sinnoh.
Yeah. The first one's still called Kanto. I don't know why they...
why they kept that but not the others.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there have been some other settings. Black and White was set in Unova, which was kind of based on New York City, and then Sun and Moon, of course, is set in the Alola region, which is inspired by Hawaii.
Yeah, and we've had like Spain more recently in the UK.
That's fun.
The most recent one was set in Spain.
Very cool.
Yeah, that one was fun. And then the one before that was supposed to be set in the UK. And then I think there's been one in France as well. So they're doing it like everywhere now.
That's kind of a fun way to update the series and give it like each new one kind of a signature.
Yeah. So
Lola not only borrows landscape and geography from 4 of the 8 Hawaiian islands, Oahu, Maui, Hawaii Island, and is it Kauai? Kauai?
I think so. Yes. I again, when I wrote this,
long time since I've heard anything spoken aloud.
This was published last year, but I didn't write it last year.
Sure.
So any pronunciations I will try and remember, but just a disclaimer that I might not remember them either.
Yeah. And I meant to look them up, and
for the presentation when I did the conference, I had like a board in front of me with like really phonetically broken down. I was like, gotta get this right. So hopefully my memory's gonna jog and remember that. But I think that one's Kauai. I think.
Kauai. Okay, so we had, but they were called Mele Mele, Akala, Ula Ula, and Pony. And instead of gym leaders, the player battles kahunas. Same function, but they call them kahunas, and that's a Hawaiian word for expert. Or I think a lot of Americans have like used colloquially the phrase like, oh, the big kahuna, implying like somebody that's important, a boss or something like that.
Like chief sort of thing.
So that's a little more familiar to a Western audience. But the game also uses the term cousin. The NPCs will refer to each other that way, and regardless of having actual kinship. So it's not saying that it's literally your cousin. It's just a common term for peers and friends in Hawaii. So there's some little linguistic additions in addition to the music and the graphics and everything, kind of setting us in a Hawaiian space. But what's really interesting here, and I think what stood out to me the most, because I had a chapter on kind of what is Japan's relationship to Egyptology in ancient Egypt. similarly, that's a little bit of the impetus here, is sort of like, what is the connection between Japan and Hawaii, which is pretty close and long standing, long documented.
Hmm.
That there's been a Japanese fascination with and admiration for Hawaii. So you looked at a lot of folks' work, but Christine Yano, for example, where
Yeah.
particularly post World War II, Hawaii was perceived as Yume no Shima, which is the islands of one's dreams.
Yeah, that was I find that quite interesting, this concept, because obviously like in the West there's a lot of like Western fascination for Japan. I think it's interesting that like they have that, but it's for Hawaii.
Mm-hmm.
Because obviously there's like lots of people in the West who like really romanticize and sort of admire Japan. So it's interesting like to see the perspective of that somewhere else, and like the grass is greener on the other side everywhere, I suppose.
Right, right. And certainly the US has like a really interesting relationship in terms of romanticizing Hawaii um, as a part of the nation but separate from it, so that
Mm,
not being on the mainland, and there's a lot of kind of similarity in terms of just like the obsession with being a tourist there, and using it as a vacation destination. So similarly, though, Hawaii to Japan is a lot closer than Ohio to Hawaii, for example.
mm.
I'd have to be on a very long, probably a number of flights. I doubt I could get a direct flight from where I am.
Yeah, it's quite. The one I don't actually know off the top of my head how close it is from Japan to Hawaii. I think it's like 4 or 5 hours or something. I don't think it's.
Yeah, very very doable flight.
Yeah, that it wouldn't like not long haul at all.
Yeah, not like a 22-hour flight that I might have to have to do
Yeah,
to get over there. So Hawaii is seen as a very good tourist destination because of that relative proximity, and then there's this romanticized image of the natural beauty and the sort of laid-back way of life, which is a contrast to the sort of workaholic culture for a lot in urban Japan. So that is definitely grass is greener. A lot of folks here are like, oh, look at all the cultural production of Japan, and don't think about like the grind of being a salary worker.
mm,
There are elements that would probably not be very glamorous about living in Japan, and I've even seen
definitely.
Instagrammers, moving there, saying like it can be really, really difficult if you are a non-native Japanese person moving to Japan. Like there's actually a lot of pretty open discrimination against foreigners. Some apartment buildings won't let you lease from them, and
Yeah, I went there for a couple of weeks back in 2019, and I mean it was great, but it was weird. Like there was, you see those things, and you're like, oh, okay,
it's a
this
place
isn't
like
like
any other.
yeah, this
Maybe
is
it's
a real
not
place
perfect.
with real people
Right.
and real problems.
Right. And so Hawaii gets the same treatment, sort of that it does in a lot of places in the West, of having this sort of like unspoiled natural beauty, and that it's just a simpler way of life, more connected to nature, kind of pastoral in that way.
Yeah, definitely, very much so.
So this is kind of the walkthrough statement of what happens in this article. So it's a couple slides. I'm going to read it. Through this admiration and fascination for Hawaii, a hybrid of Japanese and Hawaiian cultures can be recognized and will be studied within this article. This hybrid of cultural products will be referred to as Hawaii Rashi, a Japanese term to refer to something as Hawaiian esque. However, this cultural hybrid is not exclusive to Japanese games and media products. This study will first outline and specify Hawaiian musical tropes. It will then discuss how this music can be identified through sonic designators so that the fusion of Hawaii Rashi music can be better understood and categorized. In order to do this, some space must be dedicated to observing the use of Hawaiian and Polynesian musical motifs within the wider context of video games. Unfortunately, as of yet, the use of these musical tropes within JRPGs is particularly niche, and Pokémon Sun and Moon appears to be the most prominent example thus far within released games. However, a number of non-Japanese games do make use of Hawaiian musical archetypes, and they can also be considered Hawaii Rashi in nature, creating an air of Hawaiianness. These will be further explored and analyzed to establish an understanding of how Hawaiian music is presented and packaged in games before applying it to Pokemon Sun and Moon, the primary focus of this case study. What a good walkthrough statement. So clear. I often get folks saying, sorry it's so long. Like, that's usually a good thing.
Yeah, I don't remember it being that long.
It's usually a good thing. Like, here's what's going to happen. It's really, like, for the ease of the readers.
I
Um,
always find it weird, right? I'm always like in my head, I'm like, but don't you want it to be like a wow moment? Like, oh, I get it. And it's like, no, you say it at the beginning. And I'm
right.
like, but where's the fun? No fun. Just say it at the beginning so people know what they're looking for.
That's the hard thing with abstracts too, is I always tell people, like, if you're trying to save the good thing for the actual presentation, like, then you might not get picked and you might not get to give that wow moment. So it's not that it can't be done, but it's usually more successful to sort of hint at the big takeaway that's
Yeah.
going to be unique. So I love having a really clear chapter. And you know, if you think about how you do your own research, right? And like what you look for when you're reading to sort of establish, oh yeah, this is what I need for the thing I'm working on right now.
Mm.
So I work with my grad students on like determining how you're going to use your sources. And sometimes you pick up something, it has a really compelling title, and then you read it and just the methodology wasn't quite what you needed, or you know, whatever it is, and you've read that whole thing, and oh, if you're short on time, that can feel like, oh, I just wasted you know, I wasted several hours reading this thing. And not that it's not useful, but I like, it's not what I needed right now. So it can be really nice to have this kind of a statement to
Mm.
get a sense of like, oh, maybe I need to table this for right now and come back to it, you know, after I get this publication out, or wait until Dana covers it on Kudo, or whatever. Yeah, I love the yes. We will have citations to the Koichi Iwabuchi chapter, "How Japanese is Pokemon," in a random book on Pokemon and capitalism,
Yes.
and that's a great source. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Koichi Iwabuchi has some really great work.
Yeah, it was really useful. I used that a lot.
And we'll
It's
see
like
that
so many.
here, yeah, pretty soon.
Yeah.
So authenticity, you know, heavy scare quotes always.
Mm.
the word, the word has it has its own odor, to use the Iwabushi
Definitely.
term.
Definitely.
So the you know the one of the first questions, okay, we're gonna set this game in kind of a glorified or idealized Hawaii. How authentic are we going to be? So there's a question of authenticity in representing the Hawaiian or Hawaii Rashi music, especially when created by non-Hawaiians. And then there's the notion of the players taking on the role of tourists. And so how are things being presented to that audience so that it's intelligible to them, and you know, they have a good experience, or you know, so it ends up being this fusion of different aesthetics to create what. So Koichi Wabushi, a lot of people may have heard the term cultural odor versus cultural fragrance. So we should unpack
Yeah.
what
So
what is that.
and this is obviously not verbatim, and obviously he said it much clearer. So basically, the idea of cultural fragrance is kind of like the exportable, palatable, like well flavored sort of aspects of a culture, like the stuff that would be accepted and sort of appreciated outside, like removed from the culture itself. Whereas cultural odor is more perhaps like has more like cultural baggage, things that won't be understood or maybe not appreciated out, like once removed or taken to the west or wherever it might be. So the idea of getting rid of certain cultural aspects of a thing, like for music, for example, sort of getting rid of certain cultural nuances to a piece of music because it wouldn't be appreciated. Perhaps like the literacy isn't there in the receiving culture. So rather than it having like an unpleasant odor or like an unintelligible or undefinable odor, it would have a fragrance that sort of people would be able to more easily recognize and find much more pleasant, I guess. I say pleasant, I guess more acceptable.
Sure. Yeah, because odor can be more neutral, I think. Just sort of
Yeah.
this lingering quality that marks it as being from a particular place.
Yeah, I think like it sort of brings like the idea of otherness in as well. It's like to what degree is something acceptably other? And I think when it becomes unacceptably other, that's when you sort of get this idea of cultural odor,
Mm-hmm.
where it's so alien or so different that it's that there's people don't want to begin to try and start understanding what it might be. Whereas fragrance is much more like easy to sort of just accept and consume, I
Yeah.
suppose.
Apply to yourself if you're thinking of a perfume. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Kind of bring it into your own experience a little bit as an outsider. So, Alola is being constructed through a tourist gaze, so we're going to involve quite a bit of fragrance here about globally appealing to game players.
Mm.
And this is true. Um, Will Gibbons has work on localizing even Japanese games in the way that we might be trying to play more with fragrance in those cases. He doesn't use that framework, but that's essentially what he's talking about. That they're trying to make certain like musical things more intelligible or more perceived as international, as opposed to being really specific to where the game was created.
Yeah, yeah. The sort of localization. I didn't talk about that at all in this. I don't think the word comes up. But in hindsight, I kind of wish I'd leaned into, like, had some space to talk about this game hasn't been localized really, like beyond the languages. But I feel like there's definitely like an interesting conversation to be had about like localization in Pokemon.
Right. I feel
Somewhere,
like
someone should have that.
Nintendo to me strikes me as being a little less concerned with the games are almost developed to have a universality to them at the outset. I'm thinking of like their mainline franchises.
Yeah.
So they almost don't need to be translated very much other than just the language. And that's sort of by design.
Yeah. I think Animal
Whereas that
Crossing
can be
had
like
a
a big thing for other games where they have to really think about localization.
Yeah, I think that Animal Crossing had a couple of like there was some festival or like a cherry blossom festival or something in one of the Animal Crossing games, and then they localized it for the next sort of for the Western release, I suppose, and made it like an egg festival or something random like that, just on the off chance people in the West wouldn't get that specific festival.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
apart from that, yeah, there's
New Horizons does have cherry blossoms, and you catch the petals and craft with them, but it's not its own festival.
Yeah, it might not be that. I don't know what it. There's some festival. I can't remember. One of my students told me about it actually, and I was like, oh, cool. So I need to fact check exactly what it is. But I think apart from that, they don't really need much localization, I suppose.
Yeah.
Again, apart from languages, as you say.
Yeah. I've seen games have to localize like Tanabata, for example, Japanese festival. So.
Yeah.
But then other games specifically put that out there and like highlight it, but then with some explanation for the people that don't necessarily know what these festivals entail.
Mm-hmm.
But Alola is being constructed through this very tourist gaze, so there's an emphasis on motifs that most of us are going to recognize without any prep. If we play it for you, you're going to go, oh, that sounds Hawaiian. So the use of ukulele and the lap steel guitar are really common symbols here.
Yeah.
They've become kind of iconic representations of Hawaii.
Yeah, they're interestingly not necessarily Hawaiian as well.
Right.
Which might come up. I don't know if I should say that yet.
Yeah, I think it will.
Okay, I'll leave it.
Yeah. So this is the strong, like, here's a thesis as I found it, which is the music seems designed to appeal to the Western and Japanese touristic sensibilities of game players who are dipping into this rich culture, as opposed to providing an opportunity for players to fully immerse themselves in the history and cultural significance of music from Hawaii.
Yeah. I mean, it would be a lot to expect Pokemon to create like the Hawaiian experience, and
you would need a Hawaiian development team, first of all.
Indeed. And I found it really hard to find much about the composition team beyond either they are all Japanese or I couldn't find anything else to state otherwise. So as far as I'm aware, the entire like composition of the game's music doesn't include anything from Hawaiian composers.
Mm-hmm.
As far as I could find anyway.
Yeah. And this isn't to say that teams can't do a ton of research and really try to contextualize everything, but that's not always the goal in terms of marketing a game.
Mm.
So it's not necessarily an evil or bad thing to talk about someone having more touristic approach, dipping into a rich culture, because that exposure can, for some players, really lead to a much deeper engagement they could go, hey, I really liked this, let me learn more about this music on my own. So there's a non-zero chance that that happens.
To be fair, that happened for me. Like
Yeah.
I'd say this was one of the things that reignited my interest in like Hawaiian music, and then I sort of did more of a deep dive. So that worked
Yeah,
definitely.
it absolutely can.
Yeah.
You know, but that's not to say that there's no criticism to be had of having a really superficial engagement either, and one that's sort of based on the same recurring stock tropes and maybe even could potentially harmful stereotypes depending on how much care the team is taking. So
Yeah, I think also with like a nation like Hawaii, where there's history there, there's a colonialist history and stuff, like things can carry more weight to them when not done carefully as well. Or,
yeah,
there's a history there that needs to be recognized, and I think brushing over any of it musically can, bring to mind sort of like colonialism generally
absolutely.
and reflect that.
Yeah. So it is to say these practices aren't like inherently harmful, but there's definitely potential for them to kind of have both positive and negative repercussions.
For sure.
So, what are some of our Hawaiian musical archetypes? So, in the game's soundtracks, folk music and particularly traditional forms of chanting have a lot of emphasis in the soundtrack. And so this is where we start speaking to melee.
Yes.
So what is melee?
So melee is a form of like chanting, and is probably on the more traditional side, I suppose. I'm trying to see if it's written there exactly what I was going to say. Yeah, yes. So they're kind of like almost from my research. I do need to tell, so I'm not Hawaiian. I have never been. I've just done a lot of research, and as much as I can, I really enjoyed the music. So from my exposure to it, they're sort of like poetic, somewhat melodic chants, not always like subscribing to perhaps like Western melody structures and tonal structures and stuff, but they're song like, but they generally have certain themes, about like historical figures, like nature, um, deities, like not religious systems, but sort of like myth and legend and stuff, and tend to not just be the poem or song, but also include dance as well. So like hula, for example, often will accompany melee. Um, Typically not much in terms of instrumentation. Often it'll just be like the chanter themselves, perhaps some other people like calling the chants, and then percussion, typically like the ipu or keikeke drum, which are just like kind of hollowed out gourds, typically. But what's interesting, I think, if I remember correctly, which might be written in a minute, is that they were quite often used because they could be used to carry stuff as well. So often melee were given, like the chants were given as gifts, like visiting people, like you would gift them with a melee, and then by carrying the specific gourd drum, you'd have stuff in there, and then be able to stop and like play or chant. So they were quite like useful as well in terms of a form of song.
So it's like having your instrument be your gear bag at the same
Yeah,
time. Like you can
exactly.
haul all your stuff in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So quite convenient.
Yeah, and from what little I know of hula too, there's so much in terms of the gestures themselves being an agent of the storytelling. So there's a lot of unification here.
Definitely. Like there not as much as I could find in English, annoyingly, which is something I'm really running into a lot these days, is finding papers not in English. I don't know what to do with them. But finding a lot of like what I would have liked to be able to read about sort of like gestural analysis of like hula and stuff like that was quite hard to read. But because a lot of it wasn't in English, but definitely not necessarily for this specific topic, but there is a lot of research out there about that as well, sort of the significance of the movement and the gestures and stuff. Dance is not my area at all, so I don't have much that I can say confidently on, apart
Sure.
from there is research out there that I would like to get around to reading at some point.
Yeah. So a lot of folks are probably more familiar with hula, but hula is often like in this broader kind of ecosystem where the hula performance is going to incorporate all of these other things.
Yeah, typically will accompany melee chanting, like traditionally. hula would accompany that rather than a ukulele, for example.
Right. So the Leilani Basham notes that traditional Hawaiian song, like Mele, often makes reference to the lahui, which is or is it lahui? I'm guessing with the
Lahui, I believe, if I remember
lahui,
correctly.
probably
Yes,
with
that's
the accent, which apparently doesn't exist in this font, as we can see. This font does not have special characters, which I didn't realize as I was doing it.
Oh yeah, I just noticed it's Times New Roman.
Oh well. The nation or people, and Ea, life, breath, sovereignty, independence, as well as their connection to the Aina, land, and that which is Pono, proper, religious, and balanced. Righteous and balanced. I read that wrong. Proper, righteous, balanced. So these themes tend to show up.
Most of the time, like if not all, at least some. So like when I was trying to make sure that was correct and going through everything, I failed to find any which didn't include at least one or two of these.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, to be fair, they're quite broad topics, and when you're talking about folk music,
right,
a lot of stuff will come under those. So that was, quite good to be able to find that. Yes, I can confirm that's the case. Yeah.
So we will, I believe on the next, yes, we have an example on the next slide here. So, hey, aloha, moku o keawe.
Mm-hmm.
That's my very Japanesey pronunciation.
Funnily enough, if you can pronounce stuff in Japanese, you can probably pronounce stuff in Hawaiian. I found that very useful. It's like the individual vowel pronunciation,
right,
how
the
you kind of separate. Yeah, it's very much the same.
I have a very syllabic, yeah.
The apostrophes help more in Hawaiian because you can kind of tell where you're supposed to break it up.
Yeah.
Japanese doesn't have that so much.
Yeah, it's a different system for sure. But my probably more minor in Japanese from undergrad informed pronunciation of Hawaiian. It's very circuitous, but it works. So this song we're going to listen to in a moment is a really good representative example of vocal styles and instrumental arrangement of folk music. So this will be the version by Na Palapalai, using falsetto vocals and slack key guitar, using pull-offs and hammer-ons to add that sort of extra percussive element, embellishments to the strumming pattern. But you note that like some of these things that are being treated as very traditional Hawaiian may also come from other sources. So we know that falsetto singing was influenced by Spanish, Portuguese, and Mexican immigrants who also developed the ukulele in 1879, and the slack key guitar is believed to have arrived in 1832. So
yes, which was from the sort of northern Mexico as well, which is interesting because those are like the most sort of designated. These are Hawaiian things, and it's like, well, don't actually know that they are.
Right. The chanting itself is probably a much better connection to the pre-colonial forms.
Definitely, yeah. And I think that the time periods there obviously are fairly telling in terms of when these things are thought to have been established.
Right, they're much later than we would assume.
Yeah.
So here's a little bit of that. So we can hear the strumming pattern for sure. And the falsetto.
Mm-hmm.
Too much more than that, and I'm always in danger of getting struck anyway, but
oh yeah, I didn't even think about that.
Oh yeah, well when I upload to YouTube, luckily I don't monetize that channel. Like I allow ads and stuff, but like I never have an expectation that I'm gonna like earn money back on it, because yeah, I'm constantly playing other people's music as we talk about it. So
yeah,
I try to just not have it go on too long. That tends to help a little bit. All right, so from the sort of traditional elements to Hawaii Rashi specifically, this sort of Japanese fusion, and also the Japanese consumption of Hawaiian music, got really popular in Japan in the 80s and 90s.
Mm-hmm.
But even going back further than that, in the 1920s, Japanese made up 43% of the Hawaiian population.
Yeah, there's definitely like a long-standing cultural relationship there. And in terms of, I think one of the, even still, I think one of the bigger ethnic groups in Hawaii is Japanese people. I think that tends, in the same way, like often British people go to like Spain
Mm-hmm.
or sort of go there and retire. I think there's a similar maybe sort of relationship there in terms of like the close, well, like I said, the relative proximity. This is close enough to go to and sort of live, perhaps retire there. It's very idyllic, etc.
See, I didn't know that expectation. Y'all just retire to Spain?
Lots of time, yeah. There's
It's kind
there's
of
a lot
like
of,
it's kind of like a northern U.S. person retiring to Florida.
it's exactly the same. Yeah, I mean, yeah. There's a lot of sort of British stereotypes about people sort of reaching retirement and just going off to be like some sort of expat in Spain who hates the locals and expects everything to be the same as the UK, but in the sun. Like it's sort of a stereotype we have.
Wow. See, I'm learning.
There's
That's
like comedy shows about it and everything. There's a UK comedy show called Benidorm. I'd recommend watching. It like outlines like that sort of culture.
my most recent like British thing that I got into was Kunk on Britain.
Oh yeah, brilliant.
So good.
Yeah, we
And
love
there's
it.
the new one like on the I don't know if it's Kunk on the World or
I think it's Conk on Earth.
on Earth. That's
I
it.
think so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I've been
So
watching a lot of
funny.
it. So good.
Yeah.
I just love the like deadpan style. Yes. So now we know.
Mm. Similar thing. The
Retire
Florida
to
thing.
Spain. I did not know that that was a common
Or Florida or
idea.
Hawaii. I guess everywhere has their place to retire to.
Yeah, yeah, and it's never in the same the same area. I guess there's a common denominator of wanting to seek out somewhere that's like a little warmer and like it's more of a climate choice. Somewhere
Yeah.
where you perceive that the pace of life is more relaxed in some way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, in the
Awesome.
1920s, we had a pretty significant 43%. That's massive percentage of the Hawaiian population.
Yeah.
And then of course, that's going to shift a bit after the 1920s, but there has been this long-standing connection. And the popularity of hula, I mean, certainly in the US, kind of post-war 1950s 60s, there was a lot of interest in Polynesia, Hawaii, places where soldiers may have been stationed during the war, and so
Yeah.
there was kind of an explosion of interest in like tiki bars and like it's like a very kitsch sort of reinterpretation of these themes, but that was certainly happening in like mainland US at the time. So it looks like this happened a bit in Japan too, that like hula becomes more well known. In the 50s we had Elvis Presley incorporating Hawaiian instruments and lyrics, and so there was that fascination of it kind of working its way into early rock and roll.
Yeah. He was really into like there was a lot of he had like a strong affinity for Hawaii, so I think that was obviously his fame and influence at the time probably was fairly impactful in that sense as well.
Yeah. And Japan actually to this day has an estimated 300,000 hula dancers, and hundreds of these halau hula schools where hula is taught. So there's an interest in Japan, also in an older form of hula that doesn't use ukulele or guitar, but instead drums and rattles, more like that kind of melee traditional form of performance, with the text intoned on a small number of pitches. This gets really popular in the 1970s in Japan, so it's actually been a way of sort of continuing this tradition.
Yeah, sort of like dips back into more authenticity, if you will. I say that with very strong
Strong scare
quotation
quotes,
marks.
always. So, come back to odor and fragrance here. The ways in which cultural features of a country are associated with a cultural product. So, just sort of that lingering, like, oh, this seems very Japanese to me as a Midwesterner, U.S. person, versus the palatable and exportable counterpart as cultural fragrance, referring to the point the product gives only a globally consumable and alluring sense of the country of origin. So it's appealing, it's marketable. Yes, there's a bit of otherness, but it's sort of like a positive,
like an
this is
endearing
interesting to you
otherness.
because it's exotic to you, and you're gonna wanna
Yeah,
get this.
I guess almost like probably the most obvious example would be the way in which like Japanese media is consumed in the West. That's like cultural fragrance to the nth degree, like anime and things like that, like JRPGs as an example. It's very much the fragrance rather than any actual Japanese odor.
Right.
Not to
And
use the country that
and then
they're
it was
doing it.
right, and then it was that it was cultivated. It often is being cultivated intentionally. The whole
Yeah,
cool Japan sort of
yeah. I was gonna
economic
say,
theories of really thinking about we could make a lot of money
mm,
by getting folks interested in what we do and kind of knowing how much of Japan to put into this product.
yeah,
Japan's a good example of that because they've been good at this for a long time,
yeah.
really
Marketing is very
developing things that will appeal to Western audiences in particular.
making it work for them.
And of course, Iwabuchi developed that framework for Japanese cultural products as well.
Yes. Yeah.
But it can apply to our perception of Hawaii, especially like a Hawaii by way of Japan production.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, essentially, it is a Japanese production of Hawaii, so I think looking through that lens is still fairly appropriate. It's almost like a bit Inception at that point. You're like looking through that lens of Japan making Hawaii, making Japan, but it works.
Yeah. So Hawaii Reshi is this global phenomenon that draws on the cultural fragrance of Hawaii. And you cite a study by Kurokawa quoting guitarist Barney Isaacs, who goes so far as to say, like, steel guitar is necessary. Straight out necessary element for the Japanese to consider music Hawaiian, even more so than ukulele, which in
Definitely.
the mainland US we might consider ukulele to be the most Hawaiian thing, but it's actually the steel guitar.
Yeah, which is interesting. Maybe it's something to do with like their proximity, that they have a different cultural designator. But yeah, very much like it's not considered Hawaiian music unless it has that specific instrument heard clearly in it.
And I think actually a lot of us also, that sound is so distinctive, but we just don't we don't think of like, oh, the steel guitar. We think of the ukulele first in terms of the instrument. But in terms of the sound, I think we also kind of expect it to have steel guitar in it a little bit.
I think also with the ukulele, I think is everyone has probably seen a ukulele, even if you're not into music. Whereas the lap steel guitar is slightly more like not everyone necessarily has seen it and heard the sound it can produce. Like it's not as accessible as an instrument, I'd say. So hearing it, you might not always know what it is at first. Whereas a ukulele, they're fairly like they're kind of everywhere. Everyone can kind of.
I have one literally right over there. They're inexpensive. You can get ones that are really nice, but you can get them at like Guitar Center for like $40 to $60.
And you can carry them anywhere. Yeah, they're very accessible.
They're wonderful. I know folks that would walk around college campuses with that. Like it's even better than the acoustic guitar. You can still do your anyway. Here's Wonderwall, but on the ukulele.
Exactly.
So a really good example of this Hawaii Reshi sound is Mori no Komichi by Haida Haruhiko from 1940, which ends up showing this attempt to fuse Hawaiian musical archetypes. And I couldn't find this on YouTube. I did find it on Spotify, so I'm curious if it's going to play because I have to click on it. So maybe it's taking all of my sound from the computer. I'm sure I will know in a moment once it opens.
To be fair, one of the things in my reviews was like, don't include YouTube links because they might not be there in a year's time.
Yeah.
Here we are.
Here we are. Yeah, I think that can be fair. I wish more journals could do kind of the music theory online style of like actually having some stuff embedded, short examples, and then sort of figuring out how to do that. Wow, this opens slow. I could have just opened it myself. Okay. All right. Do you hear that? can hear this very like plaintive guitar sound. And the strum pattern behind it and the accompaniment. That gives a good sense of all of those sounds, but particularly the instrumentation, because I mean, there's nothing in particular about the vocal style, right? That is reading as Hawaiian.
I mean, they're like further on, if I remember correctly, there's some like stronger falsetto singing, but it's not as evident as like the actual Hawaiian examples, but very much like the ukulele and the sort of strumming patterns and those sorts of things. And like it was composed to give a sense of Hawaiianness, like that was part of the aim.
Yeah, slow like tempo. It's got that kind of legato melody. You know, everything's just very laid back.
Yes, very much so.
Like you are relaxing.
Yeah.
So some of the allure for Japan, for Hawaii, is the sense of nostalgia and the desire for a more laid back lifestyle. So this influences which elements are more prominent in the music. So acoustic instruments over electric, using slow tempos, using the strumming patterns that are calm. They're not heavy metal strum, right? It's like a sense of calm, relaxation. It's not frantic and rhythmic percussion that we might hear in traditional Malay, for example.
Very much so, yeah. It's very reflective and indicative of that sort of idea of it being laid back and relaxing. Whereas often Malay chanting is very not relaxed. It can be like some of it's on my like get hyper, do some studying playlist because it's very like frantic and like rhythmic. Whereas this is much like
draws attention, chill. Like it makes you pay attention to the story. I'm sure.
Yeah, definitely.
And so similarly, you know, the ukulele doesn't originate from the islands, but it's now the symbol, like one of the most powerful symbols, both musically and visually.
Yeah.
You can certainly buy cheap Hawaiian shirts, in quotes, with ukuleles on them. Yeah. Like, my husband likes Hawaiian shirts. I try to actually buy them from, like, Hawaiians. I've done some research to try to, you know, and then it's always like a while to get them shipped. They're also made out of better materials too. But
there's some really cool stores, so I really like them as well. But to get like authentic ones, especially in the UK, that shipping is not fun.
No, it's not fun, but it's usually worth it just to get like really nice ones. And then there's companies like Geek Tropical that there's Pokémon Hawaiian shirts you can get.
Yes, indeed.
I've seen. Those are pretty cool. But yeah, like, you know, the stuff that you go on Amazon, you look Hawaiian shirt, it's like, it's usually plastic based fibers and it's like the designs just aren't as pretty. But you'll see ukuleles all the time on like the cheap ones. I don't think you tend to see those as much on like actual Hawaiian designs. There's a lot more emphasis on natural symbols and things like sometimes waves and things like that. But there's like even in something like a Hawaiian shirt that's a pretty recognizable motif, the types of things that are on them can change depending on where they're coming from.
Yeah, and often draws back to like those sort of topics and themes that come up in the Malay as well, like nature and sort of all of those different facets which seem to be quite important to traditional cultural aspects rather than the ukulele just being
right,
just the pinnacle of everything that is Hawaiian.
Right, here's a shirt with all the ukuleles on it. So the way in which Hawaiian music has been consumed by non-Hawaiian composers and musicians packages Hawaii as a paradisical destination composed through the lens of tourists and vacationers longingly admiring the appearance of a certain lifestyle rather than a basis in tradition or reality. That you know, just because you live in Hawaii doesn't mean that you don't have a day job, right?
Exactly. Yeah, very much so.
So, where has this shown up in games? I tried to launch my Sims 4. Let me tell you, Origin like went defunct, I guess. And now you have to like pay EA Games some kind of a membership like monthly thing, and I don't play The Sims 4 enough. So I was gonna just open it and like do the island living pack. But yeah, I've barely scratched the surface on Sims 4, and I went to do this the other day, and they're like, "Oh, we don't do the origin store." Anybody that might know more about this, I was like, "What is happening? I already bought the game. Why do I have to pay you a monthly fee to play the game I bought?"
That's terrible. I didn't know they did that.
I don't. There's got to be a way where it's still fine to play it.
Yeah.
I just like
be.
couldn't navigate the interface when I was looking at it this week. And I've barely scratched. I played a ton of Sims 1 and 2 when I was younger, and so I got interested in like, oh, let me do some Sims 4. And so I bought that and a couple packs on sale, and I sort of started making one house. I haven't done much in it yet. But anyway, Sims 4 Island Living does allow players to visit Sulani. I looked, and I also tried to find just like gameplay footage, and it was either, Let's Plays where people are talking over it, or the trailer, which
so
you can
these
hear a little bit, but
you won't really where this shows up is like because I've never played The Sims 4 because I tried, but it's too much. Like Sims 2, fine, I get it. Sims 4, there's too many things in here. I'm confused. But like it's when like the house building section, like or like the making the sim themselves. It's those bits of the island living pack which have got that do this basically, rather than just like the gameplay itself.
Right. The gameplay, there's really not a lot of constant music happening.
No.
The trailer had a little bit, but it was like the main character in the trailer was a mermaid. It's a weird trailer, which I had never seen because I've never looked up Sims 4 trailers before.
It's like the house building music. That's where it kind of shows up.
Which in early Sims was kind of fun jazz. Or there was in the build mode or the buy mode, I remember there was like almost like a 1950s like supermarket, pizzicato. It just had that like sprightly capitalist vibe.
Oh yeah.
It sounded to me very 50s. So they've replaced that in the island living when you're in build and buy modes, and the make a character screen where Sulani's based on Hawaiian Polynesia, and it uses marimbas, lap steel guitars, ukuleles, and of course the imagery of the islands. There's an active volcano. There's an in-game family named Kealoha, which means love in Hawaiian. But an example I was able to find more of, and I've played a lot actually, is Civilization 5.
This example was interesting when I found this. This was like...
So I usually play as Ramses. I'm a very big Egypt nerd, so I usually play as Egypt when I do Civ 5. Haven't done it in a while, but I spent a lot of hours in Civ 5. But you can run into Kamehameha the first, based on the historical figure, as the leader of the Polynesians in DLC for the game. And so, like all of our nation leaders in the game, you have a theme for when you encounter them in a friendly way, in like a peaceful setting, and then you have, if you are antagonizing them or trying to take them over, start a war with them, there is a war theme. So you get these, and they are usually based on some kind of traditional melody from that place, as much as they're able to, because like we don't have surviving music from ancient Egypt, so that has to be newly composed. But for a lot of the cultures, it's an actual folk song or something. So in this case, it is Hole Waimea, piece written by Leleohoku II, who is the brother of Queen Liliuokalani.
That was pretty good.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah, if I remember correctly.
Again, I'm just like relying on the Japanese here. I know that we've seen that name because she wrote Aloha Oi, which is one of the most famous.
Yes, and she was like the last queen of Hawaii as well, if I believe, and also a composer.
Also a really prolific composer. But a lot of us have heard Aloha Oi is a kind of classic.
I think I write about that. I think it comes up later.
Yeah. So this one is actually written by her brother, Hole Waimea. So the two variations, there's the peaceful version and the war version. And interesting in how we're going to hear them both in a moment, but how they're deployed. So the peaceful version uses the lap steel guitar, ukulele. It's slow, it's relaxing, a lot like the Hawaii Rushi music we were listening to. Subtle use of choir in the background. The war version is set in minor, begins with heavily distorted synth brass, lap steel guitar sounding siren-like, akin to a siren. And the civ music conforms to Hawaii Rushi in the peace form, but alludes to melee in the use of chant in the war form. So how interesting that we're relying on this much more traditional sound for the warlike version.
Yeah, I found that one really interesting.
Yeah. Says they're more aggressive, more traditional Hawaiian musical tropes take the forefront. I guess because folks heard that chant and thought it just sounded warlike. Like,
probably.
Like, that seems well suited.
Yeah, I think it's a good like cultural fragrance versus odor example though. Like the one that's culturally fragrant is the peaceful people. The one that's odorous is they are our enemies, which I think is definitely an interesting sort of like.
Yeah. So here's the peace version. Slow, very orchestrated, I notice.
Yeah.
So there's this drum pattern, subtle choir in the background.
Almost like the sound of waves as well.
Invite you to share my feast and fire on the screen. Neutral. So we're not like besties, but this is the peaceful version. It's interesting to me how it starts so like Western orchestral and then it kind of like settles into the Hawaii Rushi sort of style.
Yeah, that happens a few like with a lot of the Lilo and Stitch examples, which are probably coming up as well. They do that as well, like Western orchestration techniques, something that makes it very obvious, like I am listening to a piece of music. Whereas melee can often be
yeah, versus this is the melee version. This is the aggressive play. So you'll hear it's the same melody. It's the same piece. It's just being reinterpreted here. So that sort of bliss slide of the lap guitar sounds like almost like an air raid siren. Yeah, Karen Cook has an article on Civ 5 in the works, just waiting to get it published, if I recall.
Western, like it's
still
almost
quite
like
Western
cinematic
orchestration. Yeah, it's like cinematic. So it has just like a couple elements, but it certainly started off with the chanting. It had the percussive kind of ostinato happening that stays through it. Overall, for a war theme, I still think it's a little more laid back than some of the other ones.
Yeah.
But part of that is the Western orchestration is kind of coming in and smoothing things over.
Mm-hmm.
The violins, I think, don't read as particular. They're not being written in a warlike way to me.
Not at all.
They're just very, very, very legato. Not a lot of jumps, a lot of like kind of smooth contours, and so that it still reads as a little bit laid back to me in a way.
Yeah, I guess compared to the other one,
can't say I've gone to war with him before. Because I'm always a bit scared to be warlike in the Civilization games. I usually just try to build a lot of monuments and do like a culture victory.
Yeah, I don't do much of the war side myself. It's stressful.
I find it stressful. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I usually try not to like attack people, which
Yeah.
I don't think anyone watching will be surprised that that's my style of gameplay in Civilization games. Like, let me build a library. I don't want to fight anyone. And I have a hard time like getting rid of that. I sometimes will say, okay, I'm going to try one where I'm going to do that. I'm going to like play differently. And then, or even Stardew Valley, like, oh, I'm going to do a Joja Mart run instead of doing the community center. And I always chicken out every single time.
It just becomes too stressful. It's like I'm not doing this to be more stressed out.
Yeah, exactly. That's not why I'm gaming. So, Pokemon itself. I skipped over the Lilo and Stitch, but this is common. Stuck to the game examples, but we've certainly seen. We actually mentioned Lilo and Stitch a couple weeks ago. The Thursday night stream we did Chia, which just came out.
Oh yeah.
And there was a lot of talk about like not wanting the game to just sound like Lilo and Stitch because it's not at all the same nation. And so making sure that there were some, you know, really powerful resonances with actual New Caledonian music.
Yeah.
And John Robert Matz had to really work at that and, you know, recruit musicians locally, but then he didn't speak the language, so it was all through an interpreter and like some of those issues in bringing that to light.
At least good to see the consideration. I mean, the good thing about Lilo and Stitch is like the choir and like the actual songs used are melee songs. They're just kind of reorchestrated. So the guy who does them, I'm not going to try and pronounce it. I used to know exactly. I think it's Mark Carey Hormau, I think. And he actually is a melee chanter in Hawaii, and then he does the ones for Lilo and Stitch as well. But they
Makes such a difference.
Yeah, and like the classic ones like that everyone loves to listen to, like Heme no Lilo and Hawaiian Roller Coaster Ride, which everyone knows those songs, I'm pretty sure. And they're like absolute classics. So like they're slightly more westernized, but there is like an actual Hawaiian team of people working on making those.
Yeah, and what a difference.
Yeah.
The level of fusion changes quite a bit.
Yeah.
I think when you have a completely non-native team working on something versus actually incorporating the folks that know this music really well. Turns out.
Definitely.
Turns out we get some really great music that way. And the entire team on Chia, other than John Robert Matz, was from New Caledonia, or at least the center of the team, the leads on the project were from there, or had heritage there. I don't remember exactly, but that helped a lot because then you bring in a composer who's going, well, I'm gonna do a lot of research, but ultimately like there was a lot of conversation back and forth about sort of making the music feel right. So I think that's a positive thing.
It's also like a common pitfall is like any game and sometimes like animation and film that has anything based on like an island or anything that could be construed as vaguely Polynesian goes Hawaiian immediately. Like,
right.
Even there was some criticism like Moana being like, which isn't supposed to be Hawaii, of it being like there's more to Polynesia than just Hawaii. Like,
right.
Yeah, I think it's a common pitfall. Like any game I've ever played which has something island based will try that. Like Dragon Roost Island in Wind Waker Legend of Zelda uses like marimbas, lap steel guitar, and it's fantasy bird people. Like, why do you need to do that? You could do anything.
You could do anything. Yeah.
And that whole it's a common pitfall.
That's where it's nice to have a little care instead of just kind of conflating everything. So yeah, Chia seems to have achieved that brilliantly because they're of the team making sure that was the case, that it was good game music and it's kind of fulfilled game functions, ludic functions, but that it was also incorporating a lot of these specific elements that make it feel resonant for folks from New Caledonia. So I'm excited to play it more. Like, we only did a few hours with the composer last 2 weeks ago, and I'm like, that's like once I finish the semester, maybe I'll pick it up. I don't have time to get into a new game, but I'd like to play it. It looks beautiful.
Yeah, it does. It looks stunning. And funny enough, I think you carry a ukulele around or something. I think that's like a
Yeah,
key
yeah.
part of the
There's a
game.
pretty intense mechanic of playing it where it's actually animated where their fingers are in the correct position. So
Oh, okay, cool.
that was
Because
one of the parts that like Ryan Thompson was like he sent like, guys, look at this. Like the fingers are in the right, like that shows a lot of dedication that they made sure that the character strumming was even correct, even as you're paying attention to the interface with the note. Like they still made the animation match up. That's pretty cool.
that like heals my hatred of Guitar Hero. It's amazing that something's actually considered that much.
I know. And there's free play mode, so there's people like releasing covers done in Chia. It's pretty cool.
I love that. There's so much to talk about that. Then
Oh,
that's
I
great.
love that kind of stuff. Okay, so Pokemon. Initially, especially at the time it came out, and the first one, the model for well, not the model. It's not like folks were being handed Gan's 8 Melodies template. This was, of course, an article about Sugiyama that has just gotten very popular,
Yeah.
describing the sort of common functions, the 8 themes that you tend to see in a Japanese role-playing game: castle, town, field, dungeon, title screen, ending, regular battle, final battle.
Hmm.
I guess that's battle is kind of broken down into subcategories. Battle could just be one, but that most of these games are going to have these.
Yeah.
So again, it's not like there was a manual being given to the composers, but this just shows the influence of Dragon Quest, Sugiyama in particular, and how many of these JRPGs followed that template exactly. Yeah. And so Pokemon does pick up on some of this, but not 100%.
Yeah.
Even in the beginning.
It's like towns and stuff tend to have their own distinct themes, which I think contributed a lot to the success of the music from the franchise. Like things like Lavender Town and all of these like games which have like the towns which are very like iconic. Because like Dragon Quest, every town has the same piece of music typically.
Right. Just to mark you're in a town.
Yeah. Whereas I guess like gyms are typically the same in Pokemon. They're like those grounding places rather than a whole town itself.
Yeah. So yeah, gyms have the same melody. Wild Pokemon encounters, you have like a battle theme, but there are special battle themes, like trainer battles. Yeah. But there's more variety overall than just you kind of find like a vestige of the 8 themes in different forms, but there's more than just one field theme. Like each route has its own, or region has its own theme. Each town, for the most part, some of them share, but for the most part the towns have their own themes, and so they have a lot of like specificity, and so the template ends up fitting there for that.
I think it's used like just enough to sort of ludically ground the player in like, this is where you are in the narrative and the story, and you're in like a safe space perhaps, rather than somewhere where you can have a random encounter.
Yeah.
Whereas like the players kind of kept on their toes in terms of like the tall grass sections in routes, which is like the places between towns. They're always different depending on where you are. So like they're grounded based on the familiar melodies, but they go through all the games as well. So all the games will have the same Pokemon Center theme.
Yeah. So the divergences, the town and overworld themes in particular, correspond with the westernization experienced by the Pokemon franchise. A very deliberate attempt to turn Pokemon global. And I mean, it is what the most lucrative franchise ever.
I think so, yeah.
I think this is still the case. Yeah, so there's John Michael. This is what John Michael's thesis is on, looking at the town themes in particular.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
From the perspective of topic theory. It's gonna be so fun.
It is
what I've seen already is so fun. So yes, Western RPGs often allow their players a lot more explorative agency compared to their Japanese counterparts. So there's open worlds are getting more and more popular, but Pokemon kind of started that trend a little bit by having this notion of like going out and catching wild Pokemon, necessitating like a kind of a bigger area to wander around, and focusing making those spaces unique, where you're like, oh, this has a new track, I'm going to catch different Pokemon here. I imagine that's kind of what the player's thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like with Western RPGs, typically the player doesn't have to go in such a linear manner.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, and Pokemon is linear for the more recent ones, less so. You can kind of go wherever you want. Like you'll have skill levels if you go somewhere to like at a high level when you're not at that skill yet. But even prior to having any, like when it was town after town, the fact that you can explore, you can spend time like grinding and sort of getting like leveling up and stuff, it is in itself a degree of agency which tends to sort of gear slightly towards like Western RPG mechanics.
Mm-hmm.
Historically, at least. That's very much changing now.
Yeah. But even in a franchise, we have the recognition that you don't just throw out all the music either. In a new iteration of the series, there's usually some melodic threads that are maintained. And, you know, Final Fantasy uses its prelude and like has the little victory fanfare show up so many places, has like the Chocobo theme. And here we have the Pokemon Center theme, the evolution or egg hatching jingle. Like these are getting reused. There's a lot of orchestral music in the franchise. And in these games, and Sun and Moon in particular. And so there is some reuse we will see. We have this one flat 7-1 chord progression, which is often in the title screens and the gym music. So all of that is retained. So there ends up being an interesting fusion here, where the instances of world building in the two games make a musical departure from this 8 melody template, allowing for a divergence from traditional composition expected within the Pokemon games. So the world building is where the players are being really positioned as tourists and told to explore the world. I mean, implicitly.
Yeah, and they're never going to be familiar with the music. Like, it'll always change town to town. That will always be a new piece of music for them, so they'll always be experiencing it for the first time in a very sort of touristic manner.
Mm-hmm. So and the characters has just moved there, so they're neither local nor native, and that allows us to experience the world as the outsider or tourist, and kind of our in-game avatars reinforcing that.
Yeah.
Okay, so only elements that appeal to players would be relevant for inclusion to create the Hawaiian-ness of the world of Lola. So this is the fragrance again. So let's hear some examples. Welcome to the Alola region. First piece we hear opens with chanting in a fake language. Ample use of percussion, choir vocalizing, so it is akin to a melee form associated with Hawaiian ritual and dance. So this is our introduction. And I didn't have gameplay, so I just had a tiny little... And then we have kind of our orchestra. But certainly right off the bat, you're like, oh, okay, this is, not the last Pokemon game that I played. This is something new.
Yeah.
And then it kind of moves into that kind of like heroic title theme.
That's very,
orchestration.
like, that bit is just it's incredibly Pokemon-esque.
Yeah.
It's
very Pokemon-y.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some other examples, the Ikitown Island Festival uses steel pan, distinctive rhythmic percussion, and panpipes, which is something that also came up in Dragon Roost Island and Wind Waker.
Oh, yes.
So native islandness in kind of a generic sense.
Mm-hmm.
And the electric bass too is like really hopping. Gives it a warmth.
Yeah, I think this company is this company's like an actual festival where there's like
That was so loud. Sorry, go ahead.
That piece like accompanies like a sort of festival in the evening, like kind of almost near the beach. There's tiki like torches and Hawaiian shirts, and it's very visually of that aesthetic as well.
Yeah.
But also the melody is very much like the actual melody is still very Pokemon. Like there's certain sort of like riffs and stuff which are a bit more exotic, but the instrumentation is the only thing that really makes it other. Aside from that, like it sort of strikes very Pokemon-esque in terms of the melody.
I feel like that's pretty common, right? Like if you're a composer that doesn't know Hawaiian music in any depth, sort of the easiest feature to latch onto to give it something new would be the instrumentation.
Yeah,
To
that's kind of
actually learn sort of like melodic construction, like phrasing, like text setting, like I feel like that's kind of a next level of familiarity that's needed.
definitely.
Yeah. Alola's Honolulu, called Howley City, features a theme with the melody on ukulele. So, again, ukulele is a good way to get us to Hawaii in our minds as a tourist. Apparently, the night version of the theme is fantastic. I'll have to go listen. But yeah, it's not as like slow. You know, this is not the Yume that we had in the beginning, the dream. This is not the slow island. Like, this is a city, Honolulu, basically. So this one's got quite a bit of pep in its step, and I noticed again a very active bass.
A lot of the time, I think.
Yeah,
I think that's just a Pokemon thing.
mm-hmm.
Like, a lot of the soundtracks make quite heavy use of the bass, but also I wonder if it's maybe because like having just ukulele, there's not much filling in the lower frequencies there. Like adding, it's very high pitched. It's hard to get that sort of like bass from it. So I wonder if that's just like a logistical making it sound good.
Yeah, just filling it out a little bit more.
Yeah.
But so that happens in the world building, in the kind of individual towns and the regions. For the more ludic functions, like the battle themes, it tends to just kind of be Pokemon music.
Pretty much, yeah.
So there's a divide being created here. So musically, the accompanying underscore and non-diegetic sounds for RPG gameplay elements seem to adhere much closer to the traditions of Pokemon music itself, and more of that like 8 melodies template rather than the Hawaiian musical tropes.
Yeah.
And then you note that the overworld route music, Route 1 music, doesn't really take on a particularly Hawaiian element. It's being led by Piccolo, so using a Western instrument instead of the ukulele here.
Yeah.
Strong electric bass again.
And also trumpet.
And trumpet,
that's a big thing. Or brass.
There's some mallet percussion in there, which the mallet percussion is not reading like the way marimba is often kind of taken into that Hawaiian context. It's reading as more like kids media, you know, like lighthearted. This could, if you played this to me and said this was like level 1 of a Mario platformer where it's like a green field and the flowers are smiling, you know, and there's a big sunshine, like
that's kind of what Route 1 is, like in a Pokemon. It's very much that, but also the trumpet thing. So Pokemon's very much known for having like lots of sort of trumpets and brass instruments. I think Gen 3, I think it was like someone made a YouTube cover of all the soundtrack, but everything was trumpets, and it barely sounded any different because they just always have trumpets everywhere.
Trumpets everywhere. yeah Trumpet takeover in Ruby and Sapphire.
That's one. I think that's Gen 3.
Yeah, that's pretty excellent.
And I probably should have mentioned somewhere, the ones like the Hawaiian-esque pieces don't have trumpets, whereas all the other ones pretty much do. So
it's really notable. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like we are making a conscious decision to not do the thing we normally do here.
Yeah.
The evolution is interesting moment here of this fusion or hybridity, because there are Pokemon that are native to Alola and then those that are not, and the music for the evolution depends on whether they are Alolan or not. And so the one that isn't just sounds like the evolution themes from the other games. The Alolan version still uses a sort of rising shepherd tone that is common in the evolution, but the instrumentation uses marimba and there's faint chanting. Also in this sort of made up unintelligible language that could also be a representation of melee. So here is evolution for a non-native Alolan Pokemon. There's the brass.
Yep.
And it just keeps going up. That's what it does. It is, to me, it reads like menu music, like yay, my Pokemon's evolved. Maybe like read a little, I don't know, does it show you like their new stats or something?
No, this is the bit when it is evolving. So
okay.
There's like an egg or a Pokemon, and then it sort of does that until either you press like B because you're bored, or you just let it you let it continue so you hear the full thing.
Yeah.
Although that's apparently like an hour long, and I don't know how.
Yeah, I don't know.
That sounds painful to listen to.
It's probably one of those where it loops 10 hours of evolution. Oh, yeah. I can't imagine like wanting to sit on that menu. Like I would be excited initially and be like, oh, I'll watch a little bit of this, but there's not too much longer I would sit through. The theme, the theme just isn't distinctive enough. It reads as very like menu-like in the sense of like, okay, get on with it.
Yeah, that's pretty much all it is.
Here's the Alolan evolution, though. Instantly, such a timbral difference. And there you can hear the chant come in. This one I could listen to a little more.
Yeah, it's a bit nicer.
Yeah, I don't know. There's just something that's a little softer than the brass one.
Yeah.
There's more like rhythmic interest between all of the percussion being used. Trying to kind of catch the moments of chant. Like I feel like this one keeps me listening a little bit longer.
Yeah.
But absolutely night and day difference between these two to sort of mark. And what's interesting to me is like, why wouldn't they all just be Alolan Pokemon? Like why are we making a distinction in the game between the types of Pokemon?
Well, I mean, also there's not that many Alolan native Pokemon. There's like 10 maybe, and it's sort of like, so only 10 live here. The rest are like non-native invasion creatures. Like,
yeah, that seems almost colonialist.
Yeah, well,
suggesting like there's not a lot of the Alolans left, and so like we have all of these transplants instead.
Yeah, exactly. Which I don't think is intentional, but it is just a strange choice to make, like to only have those like 10, 11, however many Alola native Pokemon it is, have that evolution.
Yeah.
Especially because it sounds so much nicer as well, I think. Like, you know, you can go through that game without ever getting an Alolan native Pokemon, really.
Yeah, depending on playstyle, probably. Like.
Yeah, so you may never hear that.
Because I know they say gotta catch them all, but like the game doesn't force you to completion of the list, right? Like.
Yeah, I mean, it would be very long-winded. I've never caught them all personally. I don't have enough patience, but yeah, there's like 800, 900 or something.
That's a lot. That's too many. Have we hit too many Pokemon? Have we hit like critical mass of Pokemon?
I don't think we ever will.
I don't think we ever will. Absolutely. So, importantly, and as shown in these examples, we can very easily categorize the music in the entire score. The ones that are the very RPG reliant versus the world building. So the Hawaiian musical archetypes are only implemented when we're trying to do the world building.
Yeah.
And show the different regions and some of the cutscenes. But the moments of intersection, like the evolution of the Alola native Pokemon, allow for some hybridity because, of course, that's the exact same melody. It's just being sort of reinterpreted. And so it's neither Hawaiian centric nor Pokemon centric. It ends up being really between the two, maintaining those melodies that have been featured before, but rearranging them for this instrumentation that marks it as being particularly Hawaiian in sound. Particularly amongst a team of composers originating from Japan. So these are the markers of Hawaiianness that are the most Hawaiian to the Japanese composing team.
Yeah, so just definitively Hawaii Rashi.
Right. And so they include certain embellishments to add a sense of exoticism and Hawaiianness to the gameplay. So then we kind of close out here with the notions of literacy. And I was this in the project to begin with, or was this something that got added sort of in the editing process where they were like, oh, can you expand on?
It was a little bit. It wasn't. It was, yeah. I mean, so actually, what wasn't in the original was the tourist gaze.
Mm-hmm.
That was part of the. It was like I never knew it was a framework I could use, like the idea of the tourist gaze. But I did use literacy. But then the sort of feedback was like, interesting, but perhaps not strong enough. Like I was sort of touching on this idea of the tourist gaze without knowing it was a thing. Read the book that it was a thing, and then I was like, okay, I see how I can link these two together.
Mm-hmm.
The reason, like, literacy is part of what my PhD research, like game musical literacy is part of my PhD research. So I was kind of keen to get that somewhere in because it made sense, and also I was like, this will be handy. So like if it gets published, I can kind of quote myself a little bit in my writing. But it was something that I kind of was comfortable with, and I was like, I can see, because cultural literacy is a big part of my thesis. So I was like, I can kind of see how these two would work. So then once the review came in saying talk a bit about tourism a bit more, I sort of tried to marry those up.
Yeah, it works really well because ultimately, you know, this ending section, you're sort of saying the extent to which an individual player is going to recognize Hawaiianness or, you know, even the JRPG tropes. It's dependent on both the cultural literacy, which allows the player to get those allusions to Hawaii through the use of Hawaiian words, references to real places, understanding the musical tropes and archetypes is referencing the culture in question. So being able to know, like, oh, that's ukulele, or at least know that sound on steel guitar as the Hawaiian symbols.
Otherwise, half of it wouldn't work at all.
Otherwise, it doesn't work. And there are there is a non-zero chance here that you're going to get somebody that is young enough that maybe doesn't have the literacy to really know what they're listening to.
Definitely.
You know, and just go, oh, well, that was just the music in the game. Like, I didn't think anything about it.
Yeah.
And then maybe they get older, and then someone's like, oh, this is like using all these Hawaiian sounds, and they're like, oh my gosh. It is. But, you know, I was 4 or 5 when you know, depending on how old they were when the game came out. Maybe they just didn't pick up on it. So literacy is what makes this an act of communication and makes it effective. Ultimately, if nobody understood this as being, oh, this is a reference to Hawaiian music in some form, then it doesn't work. It just gets kind of absorbed into the rest of the game texture. So it allows it to maintain its, like, communicative act. And that plays in with game musical literacy too, because if this is your first ever video game, then battle music and, you know, intro screens and things like that, you're going to hear them without sort of knowing in game what they're trying to tell you about maybe the safety of the space you're in, or, you know, what kind of mode of gameplay is being expected of me. Am I supposed to be doing a lot of like quick action decision making, you know, selecting from a menu? Am I instead wandering around and talking to townspeople? Like, what am I supposed to be doing here?
It's
you
like
can develop
Pokemon
that
specific. Like Pokemon specific musical literacy as well. Like being able to say, this is the gym theme. I've heard this before.
Right.
If you ever played a Pokemon game, even that's going to go amiss. So everything will be world building essentially. So like this idea of whether the 8 melodies template fits or not will only depend on if you've played a Pokemon game before and if you remember it. 'Cause you might not.
Yeah. And if you've played it like any other game in that genre before, it can be.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things you mentioned here. Game musical literacy is how we understand game music communicating something ludic to us. So, for example, and this also has resonances in film music too. It's not like this is an intertextual reference, but understanding like I just went down into this dark basement and now there's a low dissonant cello. So maybe something bad is coming. Maybe there's some tension or suspense in this moment, and I should be reading it that way because maybe we've also seen that in a horror film. But certainly, if you've played video games, you're like, oh, something's going to jump out at me. I'm going to have to go into a different mode now.
Mm-hmm.
And so these things need to play together. And it ends up being like the tourism kind of fits onto both, depending on how much gaming you've done, how much you've been exposed to like Hawaiian music. So
Yeah.
I think it all kind of fits together in that way. But yeah, I meant to ask that earlier about your the process of like taking this from a conference paper that you said was kind of for you at the time at least a one-off from your not your dissertation research, and then sort of submitting it for review, having had the script version, and then you said you had your revision notes. I'm curious. Was it mostly just adding the tourist gaze, or were there some other really interesting changes that?
The major revisions were the tourist gaze. I'm just looking at my. I happen to have my review notes
Isn't
in a
that
notebook
cool?
I was looking at earlier.
Just have it right there.
So there was like reframing it to talk about, yeah. So making, because originally the cultural fragrance and odor wasn't as big a topic. It was like a passing comment, and that in tandem with the using tourist gaze as like the primary sort of framework, were the main comments. Because also it's my first article, so I was like, I'd put too much in there, I think, like just loads of different things. I was like, this is a thing, and then also this, and have you thought about this? And they were very much like interesting. The reviews were like interesting, but you need to have a thoroughfare that's going through here, that like have like a through line of conversation that makes sense. So it was like add a roadmap, because I didn't have one, and now I use roadmaps all the time. Like even in my teaching, I'm like, here's the roadmap of today's lecture. Like I love them. That's a great thing I learned. And yeah, using the tourist gaze slightly more and structuring it around that more clearly was kind of the primary, like the major revisions, which involved having to read like a whole book, because I'd touched on the tourism thing but didn't know it was a thing so much. I didn't know it was a framework I could use. And then minor revisions were like a lot of citation issues, because I use Harvard.
Oh, sure.
Like usually. So Chicago style I was like, I don't understand this at all. I never use footnotes.
It's really funny that you say that, because my first publication while I was doing my PhD thesis was in Harvard style, and I was used to Chicago. And I was like, I don't know how to do this.
I think after this I definitely still prefer Harvard. It's
That's funny. Yeah.
And that took forever. I always leave citations to the last minute, and then I'm always like, why have I done this? This is consistently the most boring, long-winded thing to do.
Yeah, it's so detail oriented, and it's, oh, this has to be in italics, but not the punctuation. Like it's like I
thought it was like perfect, and then the copy edit came back, and I was like, right, still wasn't right. Wasn't right then. Like,
yeah, that's why I do have a side job doing academic editing, and it's like I've gotten very good at some of the style guides. Like I definitely don't do all of them, but because I've been taught to kind of pay attention to those kinds of things, so I catch it a lot better in my own work. But even so, it's like you need multiple people looking at citations, because they are down to the tiniest piece of punctuation sometimes, and making sure that those are correct.
I struggle with that. And then also like adding a thesis statement was a piece of feedback, because I hadn't. The one I think you read earlier, like, I didn't have that at the beginning, because I thought the abstract would sort of suffice. Because this was like 2 years ago, and then now I love thesis statements and I love roadmaps. But yeah, that was a learning curve.
Well, what a neat publication to have this be a first foray into the JSMG journal too. I've heard nothing but wonderful things about working with Tim and Elizabeth and anybody else who was assigned to do edits and recommendations.
Yeah,
so did you find it was a positive experience? Yeah.
Very, yeah. I mean, rejection is always like you know, your first article submission is, I wasn't expecting it to be like amazing, perfect, publish immediately. But even so, it's still like, oh. like, but the feedback was super positive. Like, it was really genuinely positive and constructive.
Yeah.
And it was like a pleasure to read. And also, I learned so much in the process of doing it. Everyone from like Tim and everything was really helpful and support. Like, it was constantly being updated on the process. You know, it was stress free. And this is coming from someone who frantically checks emails whenever I apply to anything, like just neurotic email checker. And it was, yeah, it was really, it was a really good experience. I definitely want to submit more.
I'm so glad to hear that. Yeah, and I haven't done. I'm one of their readers, so I've done a couple like feedbacks for them, but I haven't done a publication for them yet.
It's so fun.
And I've had a lot of folks be like, you should do that. You are in the field. Be in the field. Well, it's like, yeah, I know. And I actually have two really interesting kind of one-offs, because I am also working on like a personal book of my own based on my discs. So it's like I have to kind of save some of that stuff for myself, but it's like I have these two other topics that are kind of out of left field for me. So I don't know that if I have anonymous readers, they'll necessarily know that it's mine, which is kind of exciting.
Yeah.
It's not going to be that like, oh, you know, I always joke that I always know a Kate Galloway paper because like Kate Galloway is going to have like environmentalism, eco-criticism, like there's like those elements that are through lines in terms of like soundscape analysis and stuff like that. Whereas, yeah, I think I have ones that are a little bit out there and going to be a lot of fun. And I mentioned them both to Elizabeth Medina Gray on a call one point, and I was like, yeah, I'm kind of considering both of these topics for this, and I don't know which one sounds better. And she was like, they both sound good. Like, I don't know where to start, but maybe this
you should.
summer.
They make it so easy. Like, it's such a like pleasant process submitting.
I know. I'm excited to participate in it once I get a couple things off my plate here. That's kind of been a big star on the to-do list. Like, just get a JSMG article out already on something. But yeah, as I've often said too, I have this toxic trait perhaps of like not creating much of a through line in my overall research output. Like, it feels like everything I've put out so far has been so like, here's this and then here's this, and they have certain threads that carry them through, but I always feel like that was interesting to me at the time. I don't know if it's going to be useful to anyone. So.
I still do that. Like, my thesis is looking like that at the moment, so like, yeah. Well, it's a long learning curve.
Thanks, Karen. I'm glad other folks think my randomness is fun. Yeah, because I really do. I think once I have a book, that'll be like one big piece of research that is kind of a signature of mine. But yeah, some of the one-off projects I get attracted to, I end up just going off the deep end, and just, you know, things happen kind of by happenstance for me. Like the animation book that's coming out this month, next week, 26th, it's coming out. That one I wrote on Dragon's Lair because Lisa and I were shocked nobody proposed anything on Dragon's Lair for a book on animation. So I didn't know what I was going to do. I was just like, oh, I guess I have to write about this game. And then I had to figure it out. And that's not normally my process. I'm normally very like, here's the whole idea, you know, as fully formed as I can make it. So it was really bizarre for me to kind of almost approach it from like the end point of, oh, it needs to be about this game, but not knowing anything I was going to say about it. Anyway, I'm just so glad to hear everybody. Like, I feel like the constructive emphasis has been a real passion project for the editors, and everybody just making this journal happen, get it off the ground. And I think a lot of the reviewers have had a similar, like, I don't want to be reviewer 2. I don't want to be crushing. I want it to be constructive. I want it to be about rigor, but not cruelty. And
yeah, I've reviewed once for them, and it was a very easy process. But yeah, it's I think the community, the Ludomusicology community, is inherently lovely. Like, everyone's just so supportive and kind and, like, you know, constructive. So I think that massively helps. Like, anyone who's never submitted anything shouldn't be afraid of getting any like scathing comments.
Yeah.
within this community, because it just won't happen.
Yeah.
Like, everyone is uplifting and wants more scholars in the field.
Yeah. And just wants to be a part of making that good work happen. So we have literacy, maybe
Yeah.
with the toxic traits that we've seen in other pockets of academia. Some folks have seen that and said, you know what, I'm going to break that cycle. And it doesn't have to be like that. It doesn't have to be any kind of like almost like hazing process to get somebody into the field of just because it was difficult for me. You know, there's a lot of trying to uplift others, and
Yeah,
it's a good space to be in.
definitely.
So, all right, we close out on this literacy idea to kind of tie it all together, because tourism implies sort of a lack of familiar. It's almost like anti-literacy. Like, not that you can't go to a place having like, I don't know, read about it or been interested in it, or researched it, but it is meant to be a much like more surface level engagement with the place you're going to, whereas literacy kind of is implying the deeper knowledge of the place.
Yeah.
But of course, in this case, some of the cultural literacy you're talking about is like a tourist like level of literacy with Hawaiianness.
Yeah. I mean, also, I think being a tourist, like, you have to, I guess your literacy goes as far as your desire to go to that country. Like, however much you know that's made you think, I want to go there. That's kind of going to be the extent of it, typically.
Yeah. So by playing these two, players leave the game having... It's interesting. We always get these pairs, but it's kind of one game, right? Like, it's...
Yeah,
I'm still wrapping my head around this from John Michael's thesis. It's like you're getting different Pokemon.
Yeah, I mean, you're getting...
But the world's the same for the
The
most
world's
part?
the same, pretty much. There might be very minor differences. You're getting, like, a couple of different Pokemon. That's kind of it. Maybe slightly different outfits.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm saying this as someone who loves Pokemon, it's a very clever way of getting people to buy more than one game when they come out. I would say.
Yeah, because I remember sort of like, I don't know, choosing your like starter Pokemon, and like, you know, I'm thinking old school like Charizard and Bulbasaur and Pikachu, like, or whatever it was. And that being sort of a marker based on like which version that mom and dad were willing to shell out for. Like, I feel like this sort of collection element it's a part of the brand, even just like inherently in the games, right? You're collecting the Pokemon, but there's also like external, like, collect all the things relating to Pokemon.
I mean, it's a trading card game. Like, it's very rooted in... I think they know the fans like to collect stuff. Like, you've got a game where one of the main mechanics is collecting stuff. We're going to sell you more games. Collect them. You know, brilliant marketing.
And good merch, and the concerts, and of course, Stefan was here at one point. But yeah, Stefan works on the game concerts for sure, and just like come see the performances and then buy the CDs of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, leave the games. You can still get a pretty good like experience of this game if you only play Sun, right?
100%.
Okay.
Yeah. I only when they first came out, I didn't play them both. I never buy them both. It seems a bit. I don't. You know.
Yeah.
That's too much money. It's fine.
Yeah, it's a lot of money, and yeah, if you're like a total complete, if it's your favorite Pokemon game ever, you might get like the rest of them, right? Like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But often what they do is they'll re-release the game again.
Like as a single version.
Yeah, so they did Pokemon Sun and Moon, then they did Pokemon Ultra Sun and Moon, which basically is like the game with DLC, but you have to buy the whole game again, kind of. And that one I got Ultra Sun, so I suppose I've had both experiences, but they're the same. Yeah. It's just a couple of different Pokemon.
Okay, thank you for explaining that, because
okay.
I've always been a little, having not played the Pokemon games, I'm a little fuzzy on like, there's multiple games, but they're the same, but they're not.
Yeah, they're the same.
All right, so you leave Sun and Moon having developed a game musical literacy that's pertinent to the titles and probably applicable to other Pokemon games. However, you argue player can't really develop a well-informed cultural literacy pertaining to Hawaiian musical traditions and archetypes if the game's soundscape was not intended to be perceived as authentic. So we're getting like cultural literacy in terms of Hawaii Rashi, or you know, the representation of Hawaiianness, not Hawaiian.
Yeah, and I think again it comes back to the fact that the composition team is entirely Japanese, so it's always going to be this perspective of Hawaii, which is a holiday destination.
Yeah.
And the music is very indicative of that throughout
So
the entire
basically,
experience.
we're being treated as tourists. Alola is being packaged to appeal to those tourists, to the foreigners. And the game, by extension, is being packaged to appeal to foreigners. So sonically, this leads to a reliance on more culturally fragrant motifs and tropes over other authentic elements that we might choose to focus on instead. Like the prevalence of the steel lap guitar in most pieces in the game, which kind of goes back to that quote from the steel guitarist basically saying, like, especially in Japan, steel lap guitar is like, this is Hawaiian. That's the moment where it becomes Hawaiian. So it makes sense that ends up being the emphasis. So the musical literacy isn't to Hawaiian music, but to Hawaii Rashi music, Hawaii as imagined by Japan.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is, like, if you played the game and developed a literacy in the game music through playing it, you wouldn't come away with a musical literacy. It would essentially be a specific Ludo musical literacy for that Pokemon game.
Yeah.
You will develop knowledge of a video game soundtrack. You won't develop knowledge of Japanese music or Hawaiian music, really. It's a Hawaii Rashi soundscape designed very specifically for that one game. So it sort of misses out on authenticity to either side, which is...
It's a great way to put it.
Yeah, again, authenticity.
Yeah, and authentic to a video game, like to a tradition of video game music, perhaps, but not to much else.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the nature of it. There's a lot of hybridity and fusion just inherent in having a multimedia genre with interactivity, and knowing that everybody's going to be bringing their own experiences and literacies into the gameplay experience too. That's going to kind of affect how this is all getting read in the end too. So even something that is completely authentic, that is only using actual archival recordings or something, like, even that isn't necessarily going to communicate to a player that doesn't have the literacy to begin with, unless the game is somehow like teaching it to you along the way. So I haven't seen too much of that. There's usually some form of this kind of like creative hybridity happening. So the melee is used as exoticism, as illustrating the world, but there are also a lot of these more Hawaii Rashi combinatorics. That's not really the word I meant, but we'll go with it. So our sort of closing statement here is that these tropes present themselves in the soundscape as the instances of the ukulele, steel guitar, panpipes, and illegible chanting, and they welcome the player to Alola in a somewhat performative manner, akin to arriving at Honolulu Airport and being presented with a lei. The musical tropes used within the game serve more as an homage to Hawaiian cultural music than a contribution to its corpus, and as such, players are presented with a culturally diluted and fragrant Hawaii Rashi soundscape produced for tourists and by tourists. Chef's kiss.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's it.
That's
I love it. I love this.
Thank you. Thank you.
So the question becomes, has this one been a catalyst to any, like, do you have any plans to kind of continue this line of research, even in kind of indirect or abstract ways, if not like specifically Hawaiian music? Well, I'm curious, like, what has this opened up for you in your process?
It's made me not enjoy playing Pokemon as much. So the fact that, I don't know, this is probably a very one-dimensional view of it, but I feel like because now Pokemon games are constantly being, like, after this was the UK one, and then most recently the Spanish one, like the fake regions where they're based off. But I think it would be very, like, you could write a whole book probably, like each chapter being like, how does Pokemon appropriate from various countries, just like one by one. But I feel like that would become a bit derivative eventually because it's the same framework essentially just being applied to different countries. So yeah, I mean, to be honest, not much has come from it since. It's sort of just out there. Which, I mean, to be fair, it's less than a year old in terms of GSMG, so it's still at the point where I'm like, ugh, Hawaiian music, enough. I'm still like I've listened to that for too much time. Like, that was a year of constant listening to melee chanting and analysing it, which can get quite intense. But yeah, I think what's useful about the literacy discussion specifically, which doesn't take up much of it, is that I use, like, a lot of my PhD thesis is about literacy, so that's been useful to just get some validation in the review process that that's a thing, like that these are things that can be used in a ludomusical analysis, and I have since been able to, like, cite myself in my thesis, which feels really good. But also like I suppose it'd be good for like Viva and stuff to say, well, some of this has been peer reviewed, and it's a thing. I can say it's a thing. So that's been quite useful. But again, that's not actually much of this article in particular, but kind of was where a lot of the ideas came from because I was already writing a chapter on literacy at the time. And it's a very applicable framework. Literacy frameworks can be applied anywhere, so they're very malleable, and it's quite a nice thing to just be able to use. So that's kind of the only time I've used it since. Yeah, I mean, it was the first time I did anything vaguely verging on ethnomusicology, I suppose, which I've really enjoyed. And because I'm again finishing my thesis, touch wood, in December, once that's done, I can then actually just like do what I want and sort of not have to worry about, oh, I need to finish this and this and this. So I would
figure
like
out
to
what projects are next.
Yeah, I've got like a lot of projects. I currently want to take in my most recent Ludo presentation. I want to do something with that, but I need to wait till I have time and stuff. So yeah, I mean, I think if anything, just the mix of Ludo and ethnomusicology I found really fun. I really like enjoyed the process. So I'd like, not necessarily on Hawaii again, but like similar frameworks and stuff, using them in the future.
I know that gets a lot of ears perked up because that's something I know a lot of us would love to see, more ethnomusicological incorporation into Ludo.
It's very fun.
Yeah.
As a Ludo theme, like 3 years ago when this came from, I was like,
there's so much to be done in those spaces, and a lot of folks in the field just don't have, like, I don't have basically any. I took like an intro to ethnomusicology course, but I didn't have extensive training in it. So
it's just very interesting. I'd need to do much more reading on it and stuff, but when I have free time again,
it's nice to think about. I always, my advisor had me create a file that was basically a save it for the book moment. If I started feeling like the thesis was running off the rails or whatever, just like, oh, if I get into this is going to be a whole thing, and just saying, write it down, so you don't forget it, and then know that it doesn't all have to be here. But similarly, we started having me do that when like I got ideas for projects too, of like, oh, I think I want to do this. And that's like a good piece of advice for people, like keep a running list of ideas you have but don't have time to pursue at the moment, because then at some point the stars will align and somebody will ask you to be in a project that earlier idea might be perfect for. Or you just find your calendar open up where you're like, okay, cool, what's next? And then you can kind of look back at that and go, oh, I had that idea. I do the same thing with syllabus ideas. I try to come up with different seminars and course designs in case I get asked to design something new. I can sort of draw on that list as well.
I have that with syllabus. I don't have that with papers, so I should probably start compiling some sort of like compendium for the future free time me.
Yeah, and sometimes I have it like decently fleshed out where I have like paragraphs, and sometimes it's just like a single line of like, this might be an interesting game to look at, or a thing to look into.
Yeah.
So that's one of that's my recommendation, everybody. Oh yeah, Dr. Cook is excited for my fall class. I'm teaching the 80s.
That'll be fun.
It's going to be from, we're going to be looking at like post-minimalist trends in art music, neo-romanticism, but also we're going to be looking at like the birth of MTV and performance music video and performance studies, gender and sexuality, hair metal, like synth pop and technology and a little bit of video game music, but yeah, the 80s.
That's gonna be fun. I'm excited for you.
That's the plan. I'm excited to like build that syllabus over the summer, because I'm gonna be spoiled for choice. It's like even coming up with what I'm gonna put on there, I'm like, there's too many good things, and I'm gonna have to crowdsource some of it too, and just be like, what's interesting. John Michael, maybe you can audit maybe. Yeah, and then we'll have Dr. Cook do stuff too. So. It's nice to have ideas of what's coming next. So I've kept you all for so long. Thank you for being so generous with your time, giving me more than 2 hours.
Thank you for having me. It's been so much fun. Thank you.
It was so fun to feature this. I'm so glad I finally got to as well, because this had been on my short list for a while of like, oh, I need to do this one. Really give it a good read. Give it a good
happy to hear it's being
Perfect.
read. It's always a very strange, surreal thing.
Yeah. Well, and it's getting cited heavily in John Michael's thesis, so
Thank you, John Michael.
so we'll make sure. I'm sure John Michael can send it to you here
Please do,
once
yeah.
the draft gets finished and once it's defended and the dust has
Yeah.
settled a little bit. But I think that'll be a fun thing to see like, oh, I'm getting cited. That's like a really neat thing, especially starting out being like, anybody's reading my stuff. What?
Yeah. I would like that.
Can't believe it. All right, everyone. I don't remember if I have anything for next week. Let me look really quick. I think next week might be nothing, but it might be not. uh, Kudo. I have a whole Google Doc. I might need to make a second one because it's getting long enough where it like doesn't load very well for me in the Google Drive. So because it's like 200 pages at this point. This is where I like take notes on everybody's articles, and then they're all in one place, which is nice. But it's getting a little bit unwieldy. So let's see where's my sidebar? Come on. Oh, it's loading so slow. What is happening with our internet right now that it's loading this slow? It's like you're streaming. Dingbat. That's why your internet's being slow. Da, da, da. Oh my goodness. It's giving me the spinning wheel. Because I want to announce what I have coming up. I should have had this open already. Because dead air is so fun. We're just going to open it here. Do I get a sidebar here? I do. Okay. Oop. Oh, everything's loading slow, even on my phone. So maybe. Oh, there we go. There we go. Okay. Ba-ba-ba. Okay, yeah, next week. Oh, okay. Next week, I'm going to look at my chapter in the forthcoming animation book. The Intersection of Animation, Video Games, and Music, Making Movement Sing, publishing on the 26th. Lisa Scoggin and I editing. Great chapters by a lot of folks in the field. And what I'm going to, next week is going to be kind of a non-traditional. I'm not just going to be like summarizing my work like I normally do. I'm going to do a close reading. I'm going to actually like kind of read the piece in real time and talk about how I would take notes on it, which is kind of a weird thing, but I thought could be kind of a fun flip. I obviously know the work and don't really need to summarize it to myself. But so I thought maybe just like a little bit on like my note taking process, see if that's at all useful to anybody. And then a lot of the end of the month and in through May, we're going to be looking at a few chapters from that book, starting probably with Lisa's work on Cuphead. We're going to talk to Ryan on the Kingdom Hearts 3 stuff and a few others as they respond back to me. So that's kind of where we're headed. Check my Discord if y'all haven't already. And that's where I'll post a more complete schedule and everything. And of course, Twitter, as long as Twitter is alive, I will still post on Twitter. So thank you all for spending your Friday here, and we'll see you next week. Bye.